This is the newspaper review segment of the show. I have a copy of the Daily Trust newspaper, and the lead story reads, Tinubu seeks fresh 7.1 trillion naira loans. A couple of riders there which state to fund agric, health, road, water sectors. Nigeria's debt hits 94 trillion naira. Interesting story. Rising debt profile, worrisome, must expand revenue base. That's according to experts. And also we see atop the page, Kano election judgment disparity, erring judicial officials to be punished. That's according to the National Judicial Council. That story is on page 30. Also, airlines must pay compensation for cancelled delayed flights. That's according to the federal government. That story is on page 4 of the Daily Trust. Also, NSITF crisis festers despite Lalong's intervention. Panel deepens probe. Page 3, you can catch that story. And beside the pictorial, we'll see some other stories there. Leadership crisis rocks Bauchi Assembly as court sacks Speaker, Deputy. Page 11. Also, electoral reform. Jega advocates prescription of cross-carpeting. INEC unbundling. And also, we see 11 traders die in Kebbi Road accident. And on the belt, subscribers grumble over data depletion rate. Well, that story is on page 19. And interestingly, that is some of the stories on the front page of the Daily Trust this morning.
Then we'll move quickly now to the Nation newspaper this morning, where the lead story is Speaker Ayedatiwa to send quit letter. You can find details of that story on page 4 of the Nation newspaper. And other stories on the paper, President seeks $8.6 billion, 100 million euros loans to improve livelihood. Details of this story also on page 4 of the Nation newspaper. Fulfill $100 billion pledge on climate change, Tinubu to tell US and EU. You can find details of this story on page 28 of the Nation newspaper. And lastly, the story on the front page of the paper there, Emefiele yet to meet bail conditions, back in prison. And also, Obaseki should have consulted me on successor, says Shaibu. You can find details of the Emefiele story on page 4 of the paper, and also for the Obaseki story on page 27 of the Nation newspaper.
We now move further to the Punch newspaper. For the lead story, bank recapitalization. Federal government backs CBN investors rush for mega bank stocks. We must address banks' capital adequacy to grow economy, Tinubu's advisor. Investors inject 110 billion naira in UBA. First Bank of Nigeria Holdings, Zenith Bank access other stocks in 2 days. Also, police nab suspected murderer, kidnappers, robbers, recover arms. Boko Haram terrorists behead 11 Borno loggers. Unfortunate story there on page 28. Emefiele fails to perfect bail. EFCC opens 1.2 billion naira trial. That's on page 26. Also, coup scare. 34 declared wanted. ECOWAS teams arrives Sierra Leone. Page 25. On the top of the Punch, just above the nameplate, Ondo crisis worsens. Assembly demands Ayedatiwa's resignation. Heavy security presence at Ondo Assembly. Lawmakers give conditions for truce. Beside that, Supreme Court, NJC screens 22 nominees. Candidates face DSS, others. Justice Kekereakon head screening panel. Tinubu may get list on Friday. These are some of the stories on the front page of the Punch newspaper.
We'll move now to the Vanguard newspaper with the lead story. Tinubu's new $8.6 billion loan bid takes debt above $51.759 billion, and the rider there requests part of 2022 to 2024 external borrowing plan for critical infrastructure. President to present 2024 appropriation bill to joint session of National Assembly today. Total domestic debt as at June 54.130 trillion naira. Analysts and experts seek proper utilization and accountability. You can get details of this loan bid story on page 5 of the Vanguard newspaper. And just below the picture story there, we have Imo DPO officers to face sanction over alleged escape of suspected rapists. Details of this story on page 11 of the Vanguard newspaper. Controversial judgments will do our best to reform justice sector. This is from the AGF, and you can get details of that story on page 9. And below that, it's possible to grow $1 trillion economy in 10 years. Tinubu is saying this, and you can get details of this story on page 8. Appeal Court affirms Fubara as Rivers State Governor. Details of that story on page 12. And above the nameplate, we'll have military onslaught forced 160,000 terrorists to lay down arms. This is from Governor Babagana Zulum of Borno State. You can get details of that story on page 13 of the paper. The Guardian lecture, How Nigeria, Africa Can Earn Global Respect. Adesina, Osage and others. Details of that story on page 8. And still coming back to the alleged fraud of Emefiele. Emefiele, not owner of firm, awarded 1.2 billion naira contract. Witness is saying this, and you can get details of that story on page 9 of the Vanguard newspaper. And that's about it on the Vanguard newspaper this morning.
For the Nigerian Tribune, we start at top of the page. Niger Republic Northern senators ask ECOWAS to lift sanctions, urge Tinubu to restore electricity supply, task military junta to roll out transition plan, release Bazoum. That story is on page 30. Tinubu seeks NAS approval for $8.6 billion, 100 million euros, 2022 to 2024 borrowing plan. We can build $1 trillion economy in 10 years, President says. I bear no grudge against media practitioners, he adds. For the lead story, Ayedatiwa, Ondo Speaker reveals details of deal brokered by Tinubu, highlights how Deputy Governor will sign undated resignation letter to be submitted to the President, says he remains Ondo Deputy Governor. Impeachment proceedings halted. Take actions forestall further crisis over Akeredolu's absence. Ondo Indigenous Right, CJ. Ekiti government sues Chef Damis Pastor, demands 10 million naira damages. Page 24, that story. Minister of Power to prioritize metering, distribution, transmission infrastructure. Son of Ogbomosho to get staff of office on December 19th. Below that, we see alleged procurement fraud. Emefiele yet to meet bail conditions. Court adjourns hearing to January 2024. And also beside some of the pictorials there, we see Senate passes 57 billion naira police trust fund budget. And finally, also about to chair Olamite's book launch on Thursday. These are some of the stories on the Nigerian Tribune this morning. And
finally, just before we get our analysts and review of the newspaper to get on the show this morning, let's take on Business Day and the lead story there, which is a big story. 2024 budget exposes Nigeria is a rich country, a myth. You can get details of this story on page 28 of Business Day. And another story on the front page there is AFDB backs Ekiti's Digital Innovation Hub with $80 million loan. Details of that story on page 31 of the paper. Tinubu to hammer on climate change, renewable energy at COP28. Details of this story on page 42. A2 of the paper. Again, Tinubu seeks NAS approval for $8 billion, 100 million euro loans. You can get details of this story still on Business Day, and that's about all of the stories on the Business Day this morning.
And we're now joined by Ben Shemang, the former Director of News at Voice of Nigeria, to give us some perspective on some of the headlines. Welcome to the program, Mr. Ben.
Thank you, sir.
So I really want to talk about the plan by the President, the borrowing plan, of course, but I'm compelled to first of all ask questions relating to the former CBN governor. So we've seen the man move from being the helmsman at Nigeria's Apex Bank to having corruption charges, arms possession charges, alleged terrorism financing charges. What do you make of the situation?
Well, this is a new angle to some heads of agencies that we've seen. Remember heads of anti-graft agencies, like EFCC in particular. When they were appointed, we have people who say, yes, this is the man we want. We've been expecting this kind of a person. Now he became a very great hunter of those who are perpetrating corruption. In the end, they are hunted. So the hunter at the end becomes the hunted. Now we're having a CBN governor who indeed, we're talking of terrorism charges, gun running. This is an entirely new thing to the case of Emefiele. Not forgetting the fact that sometimes I now see him with the Bible, see that he's so close to God now. You know, we should not wait till we are in trouble before we remember there is God. Like Bishop Kuka will say, some of us Nigerians, we treat God like a spare tire. You know, you don't need a spare tire unless you are in trouble. You don't even remember you have a spare tire. That's the way some of us treat God. No, it's unfortunate that the Emefiele is now engulfed in this. Just like Buhari would say, if you don't fight corruption, corruption will kill us, will fight us and kill us, bury us. Unfortunately, the man is not even meeting up with his bail condition. Is it that there are no friends to assist him to get out of this? But again, it is the law. If he's innocent, yes, he has to wash his hands clean and he comes out. And that's what we expect. And if you also look at what he was doing, even as CBN governor, he was there having intentions to be Nigerian president. And even with that, again, you brought some kind of financial policies that were not too friendly to your fellow aspirants as at that time. And so, why will you make the law, you implement the law, and you're a beneficiary of that same law?
And at some point he said he was having fun.
Honestly, when Nigerians were kind of crying, biting their fingers, see, we are virtually going to this slaughterhouse. He said he was having fun. For someone who was head of Apex Bank of Nigeria, who was aspiring to be the Nigeria's president, when those you seek to lead are complaining, all their complaints turn out to be fun for that man. In other words, we were teasing him. He was enjoying the fact that we were down there and he was up there. He could we were like chicken. He held the grains. Up there he could drop how many he wants.
How much grain we got.
And it was left for how many chicken to scramble for. So that truly is not too good for us in Nigeria. But again, where are the lessons? That power itself is very, very transient. That when you are there and you so sway, you do justice to all people, all manner of people, irrespective of religion, creed, region, or where they come from. You're going to stand for justice. But copy-paste on those who are holding other political positions. They all have been sworn in. You wake up and say that region did not vote for you. For that reason, you are denying them good roads. You are denying them fertilizer. And insecurity is in the places. You turn the blind eye. See, like it is always said, the rich is awake or are awake because the poor are awake. Because what you grab from the poor, you have to stay awake to protect it. Now, the poor also know what you took from them is there. They will stay awake in order to collect it. At that point,
so
society is in turmoil. Society has problems because those who indeed are supposed to steer the state, to a destination, are in fact turning the steering to where it ought not to be. So the driver, the passengers are almost having it not easy. But again, one day, just one day, we'll reach a very good destination.
I guess that's why many Nigerians are of the opinion that karma is visiting Emefiele at the moment. And now back to the lead story that we've read out on most of the papers this morning, which is the loan bid that the president is seeking. Amounting up to 7.1 trillion naira with all of the economic policies that he came up with. Why is Nigeria borrowing up to that amount? And what's your take on that?
Now, let us look at statistics available. Look at Nigeria as at some 6 months ago. I'm not talking of today. We had 33 1.25 trillion debt on our heads. If you translate that to dollars, it becomes 43.16 billion US dollars. Foreign debt. Now, what about domestic? All those who are doing our roads, construction of housing estates, construction of offices, all sorts of domestic debt. And these are Nigerians that we owe. When I say we, the three of us in this studio, we are owing them according to government, since we constitute the government. You know, now we owe these domestic contractors 54.15 trillion naira, and if you translate that to dollars, it's 70.26 billion. Now, the danger in this is many of these local contractors borrowed money from the banks. These monies are from companies who kind of saved their monies in these banks. Now, you also have civil servants who saved their monies there. Business people, churches, mosques, all this money kept in these banks. Now, these local contractors went and borrowed. Some of the work so finished. There are some government agencies that are just perpetual, they owe people. They are what you call judgment debtors, as opposed to judgment creditors.
Okay.
You know, in other words, judgment has been delivered against you, but you don't pay.
Right.
So you owe the government, or you owe the contractor, so to speak. So you find quite a lot of these things. Now we're talking of a situation where the central bank is again talking of recapitalization.
Right.
In other words, the central bank has a kind of seen the books, the balances of these banks. What is it do they have to show that they are still having that muscle? Are they the foundation, is it shaky? And that's why they're saying, look, we have to recapitalize. In other words, if you must stay afloat, you have to increase the money to make you look like a bank and operate like a bank. And if you therefore try to do recapitalization only to realize that you don't have the ceiling, the benchmark, then you have to do some mergers. So now, in doing some of these mergers, do we have depositors who will suffer? So quite a lot of things here. We expect the economic team of the president to look at many of these things. We don't just talk of policies. Where are the people who should be a kind of checking to see that, yes, we have stop gaps, 1 to 10. When we move 1, 2 steps, we look front, we look backward, how far have we done? Then we move on. But you don't just announce a policy and you stay there. I think there should be a think tank that should be a kind of overseeing some of these government policies, so that we reach a destination that Nigeria is known for. If they say we are the first or the #1 economy in Africa, then it should so be it. Then when we say we are Big Brother Africa, Big Brother, should it be in size? Are we after all up to the size of Niger Republic landmass or Sudan? But again, if it is population, we have. But what are we doing for the population? Very, very key, critical to government, to the populace.
All right, Mr. Sherman, while we are talking about how senior we are to our younger brothers across Africa, there's also this issue of airlines and them having to pay compensation for cancelled and delayed flights. But before then, you spoke about the obligations of the government. You spoke about how much that this government is owing in terms of loans. Of course, we know that some of these loans were not even incurred by the current administration. But here we are. It's seeming like every sector is suffering in terms of one infrastructural deficit or the other. I'm going to the airline sector because of what happened a few days ago with regards to, the United Airlines and the whole brouhaha from Lagos to Asaba and then back to Abuja. So what do you have to say about this seeming attitude in the aviation sector and how it can be addressed?
I once boarded a plane from Burkina Faso, Ouagadougou, coming to Nigeria. We virtually stopped from every country in West Africa coming before we could come to Nigeria.
It's not a bus.
You know, and so it brings to this Molwe kind of
Exactly. Every
to like
junction.
stop. Once you see a passenger, you just say
drop in.
Mapoloko, Mapoloko. And you know, but talking seriously,
Right.
tell me how a plane with passengers built for Abuja. I mean, wasn't the Abuja radar informed?
They said bad weather.
You know, okay, if you said bad weather, I thought we have Ibadan there. I mean, you could just as well land in Ibadan there or simply return. But you went far off Niger Delta, increase the distance. I mean, was it that?
Meanwhile, there were conflicting stories, you know, in between.
Honestly, it doesn't say well about our aviation sector. It does not. Because if you also look at it, many of these airlines, say the international one, Nigeria owes them so much. How they come to all that, it's a serious matter. And that is why, even when some airlines, at the expense of sounding advertorial here, to advertise some company, you see that they would want to go abroad, but over there they've been blocked.
Yep.
Why? Because, let's say, London to Nigeria, anywhere in Nigeria, you see, British Airways will always want to come, pick us, take us back, come pick us. Why don't you reciprocate? Give Nigerian airlines operators the chances to go. But when you begin to look at these domestic issues, I am going to Sokoto, suddenly you took me to Calabar, and you said there is weather this, there is weather that. Recall that early this year, there was this issue of, I mean, Jet A1 contaminated with water.
Yes, indeed.
I mean, how do we come to that? Then you look at this month alone, how many aeroplanes overran the runway?
So, Mr. Shemang, who does this indictment fall on? Is it the airline operators or the regulators?
You see, sometimes if you just point at one person, you may not get it, but it could be all. And that's why in the aviation sector, you don't wake up and just simply say, it's the pilot's fault. You know, and that's why the accident investigation bureau will always have to do quite a lot of investigations. First of all, what was the weather condition like? Because if you look at NEMED, will always tell us almost on a daily basis. They give us about a week kind of weather forecast, and pilots are aware of this. Those in the control tower, they are aware of this.
Right.
You know, then if it is issue of runway, what happened that you didn't descend early enough, and you also know the speed at which your plane would take the moment there is touchdown.
Right.
So if you're supposed to land so meters so that you run and stop before your limit, then you went and landed middle, then you know you either have to do some sharp braking, which is against aviation or whatever, or you now run to the bush, which again is another accident. And so what happened? Were there some people doing some, I don't know. I've never entered a cockpit. Do people also chat the way workers do in offices? Because here you are, you find, if I was, without mentioning the hospital, myself, whoever is disputing, I take him there. I had some issues, I needed some checkups. This doctor was there, the face was just on this football, and you could see him moving. I just remained calm. When he realized, oh, he had a patient before him, he said, oh, God, I'm sorry. I said, no problem, doctor. I can go out and wait till the match is over, then I come in. Now, if we have pilots who are engaged in also, I don't know. I'm wrong, I'm just a novice, very, very ignorant. But do we have some attitude, I'll call it some attitude, when you are before the cockpit, in view of the passengers you're carrying, lives, you know, you're up there, do you afford to toy with them? Even if you have autopilot, is there no descending? Do you just say, oh, it's auto, therefore I can go to bed? Or you still have to cooperate with the engine? You have to interface, you have to communicate, you have to interact, you know. And so quite a lot of things will have to be done. When we were talking of airport remodeling or something, we were seeing things coming so fine. Because some 5 years ago, Air France will land in Port Harcourt only to meet cows on the runway. Very, very unfortunate on our, I mean, who do we blame in all of these things?
Well,
you know.
That's a question we all keep asking. Perhaps we go to this final one on electoral reform. Now, the former INEC chairman, Tinubu Jega, has advocated for prescription of cross-carpeting and also unbundling of the INEC commission. Now, let me read out the first and second paragraph. It says the former chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, INEC, Professor Tinubu Jega, suggested further amendment of the Electoral Act to prescribe cross-carpeting by elected political office holders. He has also called for the unbundling of INEC, as according to him, the electoral body was burdened with many responsibilities which needed to be taken off its schedule.
That brings to mind what we used to call a NEPA those days. It came out to be never expect electricity always. When they said problem has changed name. You know Nigerians do it. But talking seriously about INEC, if at the point government felt that NEPA needed to be unbundled, instead of you now have a company that would generate the electricity, Genco, you now have the one that would distribute. Disco. And then you now have the transmission, so that one man is not holding, the job will be too much for him. And they said there will be efficiency. Today, they are still staggering, trying to find a balance. When they are broke, they just increase the bill. Said, no, the law said we can always increase the
he said when they are broke.
Exactly, when they are broke. I mean, now talking about INEC, if truly we feel that there are some agencies, I mean, we create some parts to handle this area, another part to handle this, just the way we did for NEPA, even NNPCL, I mean, it has also been unbundled a kind of to ensure there is efficiency. Because up to today, some people still feel that with all that, some people will say there is lackluster approach or seeming lackluster approach on the side of INEC. When some people will say we didn't see ballot papers here and the results have been announced, shouldn't somebody be held accountable?
Indeed.
Now, if we also said or we heard that before the election, money was set aside for a rerun, should there be? There appears to be silence in that rerun money. Also, something should be done too. Then, shouldn't there be a commission, a kind of, or an agency within the INEC department to sanction properly those who are erring on the side of INEC? Acts of omission, some commissions. There has to be some people being held to account because the law will say so. Then for cross-carpeting, I think that once I have been created a man, I shouldn't wake up and say I'm a woman today. People who elect you, you go to where you represent them, suddenly you abandon them because you need some favors somewhere, and just cross-carpet. And without them, you wouldn't have won anything. So I think that if you want to cross-carpet, you are free. I support Jega in this matter. You are free, but on condition that you relinquish your position.
Okay.
Yes. I'm leaving APC for PDP, or PDP for Labour, or Labour for PRP. Then, and I'm in the Senate, or House of Reps, or House of Assembly. I should resign. Okay. So that an election is held for that place. Not that you just wake up and say, my people say, who are your people? At what point did you meet? And recall should also be made to look a bit very flexible, so that for those who are not performing, they could be recalled easily. And so I think that Jega is making sense in this matter. INEC has to get a police kind of unit to police INEC, so that some people who have failed the nation should also face the law. If Tafa Balogun, as the chief police officer, could face the law, you know, they said it's a double-edged sword.
Right.
Well, you are cutting others, it can cut you.
Indeed.
And check former heads of EFCC.
Okay.
Who left that place so triumphant? You know,
those who left
if the law can check those people, who is checking INEC?
All right.
Very, very critical.
Who is checking INEC? Perhaps that's the question would leave on the minds of our viewers this morning, and also perhaps this one. I'm talking to you, the politicians, if you occupy that office. Remember, the day you're elected or selected or appointed will come to an end one day and you will leave office. The question then to ask is, what would you be remembered for? What's your legacy? I leave that to you to answer, and with that, we've come to the end of Daybreak this morning.